Hi, this is Doug Levesque with BibleNation.org and the Bible Nation podcast. The Michigan Proposition podcasts that we're about to record are going to be delivered in two different recordings. We're going to do part one with Proposition 1 and 2, and then part 2 with Proposition 3. We'd hope that you would listen to these, be educated, be motivated, and then share these with your friends, because a lot of people are confused about these propositions. And so please take the opportunity to watch and share part 1 and part 2 of the Michigan Proposal podcast. Thank you. What are we standing up for? The ability, the freedom to do what's right as God defines that right.
God's the ultimate author of liberty.
We don't want government to stand between us and our freedom to do what is right. It's election time all around the country, and here in Michigan, we're dealing with 3 different ballot proposals, and we just have a few weeks to go as we have this filming. So today we're going to talk about Prop 1, Prop 2, and Prop 3. Welcome to the Bible Nation podcast. I'm Doug Levesque, and we're here live in the studio with Tony Nash of AZ Business Solutions and Pastor Jason Georges of Emmanuel Baptist Church. Guys, thanks for being here with us today.
Good to be here.
We're going to get a little bit political today because we're going to talk about these ballot proposals. A lot of people have asked, hey, what are these proposals and how should we be voting? And we're not going to tell you how to vote, but we're going to tell you what these proposals are, and we'll tell you how what we think and how we're going to vote on these issues. You know, the best culture is a Bible culture. It's proven and it works. And if you have the Bible in your mind and heart, then you can apply it to decisions like, how am I going to vote, right? We have a wonderful right to vote, but as far as I'm concerned, all my rights have been surrendered to the Lord. I look to the Scripture on how to execute those rights. And so when I go into the voting booth and pull the curtain, I believe that's everyone's private decision. But as far as I'm concerned, I say, Lord, that space is your space. And so that helps me to deal with things that are confusing. And one of the things about all these proposals, and they're actually, in the promotion or demotion of these things, people are saying, this is confusing. I think it's confusing somewhat on purpose, about this. But
certainly.
But, all of us here are engaged in some aspect of the political game, separate from the Bible Nation Society. And so we kind of see behind the scenes what these proposals are attempting to do. And I don't know about you, I want to hear from you guys. I think sometimes these proposals are put down to try to get people who might not otherwise care about a candidate, aka a legislator or governor or something like that. That's not motivation enough for them to come out and vote. For instance, we have Governor Whitmer, and even a lot of Democrats are still remembering and disappointed with how she handled COVID mandates and things like that. Mm-hmm. And so what's going to motivate them to come out? Well, let's put some proposals that, might interest them. Right. And so I think sometimes it's a ploy like that. I think we're going to, as we see these also, I think that these are confusing because their purpose to be have a little bit of left and right leaning to them. And I think
Hidden
the idea
language.
is if we get these passed and maybe usher in our candidate, then at the same time, the next election is going to stick these mandates on the Republican candidates. In other words, Republican candidates are going to have to deal with this because they don't anticipate winning the next election.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so I think there's some, double dealing in the proposals. Go ahead.
Whitmer, remember, she came into office on the back of recreational marijuana.
Right.
So these proposals have become a tool of, and now when I say a tool, they are tools available to both parties.
Right.
Now, if we're calling the commentary on this election cycle and we're up in the broadcast booth, right, the Democrats are playing the proposal game.
Yeah.
Their ground game on this one is a lot better.
They've got a better wide receiver than we have.
They're stacking the ballot with proposals that are red meat for their base.
Yeah.
So now they have multiple reasons to motivate people to come to so people are going to come vote for Gretchen and then probably vote for these proposals. Or I'm going to come vote for these proposals, and while I'm there, I'm going to go ahead and just vote for Gretchen.
Right.
And so, I mean, it's masterful in that in just the political game. But what is dangerous about this is the depths of what they're willing to pass just to win an election.
Right.
And so recreational marijuana, right? But now we're talking about we are willing to sell our souls for the wholesale murder of children. We're going to see this in Proposal 3 just to win an election.
Right.
I mean, that's you don't get any darker than that.
Absolutely.
What they're seeing about these proposals is there's buzzwords, keywords that make people think, oh, I'm voting for a good thing. But there's so much hidden language. And when you look at these, I mean, these are pages and pages and pages of words that you pass one, you pass all of this. Yeah. And people need to really, before they vote on it, they need to read it and understand what they're truly voting on. Yeah. And they understand that 99% of people won't read it. They'll just hear, what's the headline? Oh, I'm voting for that.
Yeah. I read a lot of legalese, and so I usually can cut through it. I read all these, and I thought, man, there's things that like they're trying to throw out something that's rightist. And then there are things that act like they're trying to, hold themselves down or whatever. It didn't make sense. It was confusing. I'm like, what way are they going here? It doesn't make sense that it's coming from the left or the right. And, well, maybe we're just trying to be down the middle and helpful. But I'm like, these are going to be stuck on people. In fact, Proposal 1 is a constitutional amendment. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's a huge, huge thing.
So is Prop 3.
Yeah. And so I want people to know that you can go to michigan.gov /SOS, which is Secretary of State /elections /upcoming election information. If you Google that, that'll come up.
We'll put the link in the description.
Yeah, and so you can go and you can read the proposals, because we're not going to read them all in the 30 minutes that we have here to talk about things. But let's go ahead and just start. We'll start with proposal number 1 on the Michigan ballot. It's a constitutional amendment that is expanding the time that a legislator can stay in the legislation to 12 years. I think now it's 6, isn't it? Mm-hmm. So it's doubling the lifetime of a legislator in there. Now, I don't know. That just doesn't seem good. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And if you put a guy in there for 12 years, it's easier to have a cabal, or whatever. And then also part of that is modified financial disclosure. Now, I've run for office, statewide office, and the paperwork is difficult. The software is difficult. They won't really let you just go to the election office and fill out a form anymore, or do stuff on paper and mail it in. You have to master this stuff, and most people don't. I've had other people that are running for office in the Republican Party call me and say, now, what do I do here and how do I do here? As though I'm, perfected it. And I said, well, at the end of the day, I hire an accounting firm that is good at this, and I pay to make sure that things are turned in. And the fact of the matter is, almost everybody that is running, especially on a statewide office, is doing something wrong and getting some sort of fine. Mm-hmm. And they don't say that, but it's such a way that somebody could get a hold of that and say they had fines for this and not reporting this and this and that. And so what it becomes is like with Hillary Clinton and Obama, they were wholesale receiving money on the internet in $20 increments from China, Russia, and people were just going click, click, click,
through
click,
their
click,
foundation.
And it was known, but it was like they were skirting enough stuff that there wasn't enough there to bite in. Yeah. And so if there's a game to play, it'll be played when it comes to taking money. People want to start their own 501c4s, and that way they can raise absolute money over here, and that company is supposed to be neutral, but it's altogether promoting one candidate. And that happens all the time.
On the financial side of this proposal, and in the financial side of politics, it's purposely designed to be cumbersome so that then it can be selectively enforced.
Yes. Right.
So
absolutely.
No one gets it right.
Right.
Everyone has an infraction, but now that puts it on those that are in power to selectively enforce who they want to criminalize.
Right.
So everyone's wrong. No one, and not anyone ever crosses their T's and dots their I's perfectly. Right. But now I can focus on this candidate or whoever. And of course, we saw that in the last election cycle. But what makes this wrong? Okay, so the Bible kind of perspective is the idea is that this is done under the guise of integrity. Right. And so therefore the voter, the American public believes
we're trying to make things better, and you're not.
That we're going to have more integrity, and yet there's no integrity. It would almost be better to say, hey, there's no integrity in this. Right. It's the wild, wild west. You need to do your due diligence. Don't trust anything. I think we would get a better turnout if everyone would just realize that.
Yeah. Well, and this is in conjunction with, Biden's Inflation Reduction Act calls for the hiring of 87,000 new IRS agents.
Right.
And so there's going to be a huge team that are going to be able to audit whoever, whenever, based on this new legislature that was passed.
Well, especially the federal election laws. But like in the state of Michigan, like if you go to the Secretary of State, in Michigan, and you go to the Bureau of Elections, I mean, it's crickets. I mean, yeah, there's people working from home now post COVID, and it used to be more. But comparatively, there is not enough people in the Bureau of Elections to handle all the elections in every county and everything else, let alone the state ones. And so they're only going to look at, and you know, this is per their own admission, they're only going to look at what someone complains about. So if you just can learn how to fly under the radar, and the Secretary of State, who basically is overseeing the Bureau of Elections, is, you know, usually in the hand of the governor. And so whatever party's in command can kind of do what they want.
Selectively enforce that.
So this is a constitutional amendment that would be, you know, very difficult to overturn, that's going to put the wrong people potentially in power for the longest amount of time, especially if you're redistricting and things like that, and then modify their financial giving under the auspice of, oh, they're legit in such a way where they're going to play the game to where they're getting bigger money that they don't have to report. And it's saying that, you know, we want to know where your money's coming from, but rather than have, you know, 10,000 people who gave you $100 and you have to get information on all of them, what their employer is, what their income is, like you have to get all this information to do that. They're just going to, you know, they'll say, yeah, I got 6 individuals that gave me that, but then I had this 501c4 and this 501c4 and this PAC and that PAC, and then they can just kind of easily report 6 people gave them money and they had $10 million or whatever. And then you can't see where that money's coming from unless someone complains, and then, you know, there's invitation to go after that. So they've, and particularly on the left, and I think on the right too, have, you know, the dirty politicians have figured out how to play that. And so this offers no extra really integrity. It actually kind of invites you to do more of the same of what you're doing. But the real danger is letting someone be in power for 12 years.
Well, and so now get away from the financial side to the term limit side. You know, the argument of legislators is that it takes time to become a good legislator.
Right.
And so by the time a guy becomes seasoned, understands the process, becomes efficient, has influence position, now they're term limited it out. But that's the design of our government.
Yes.
Our government was not designed to have career politicians. You were supposed to go do your little season and then go back to your life. Now, we do have a farm system in our government. And so the idea now is, if you are one of those good legislators, so let's say you come into the House, in a Michigan House, and you do 3 terms of 2 years, well, now it culls down, run for state Senate.
Right.
And then get your 3 terms at 6 years. And so you can have a career in politics, but with term limits, it forces you every couple of cycles to come through another refining process where now there's fewer positions. So only it allows the cream to rise. And if you're good, or you're a good career politician, you should be able to keep going. But to be able to stay there at the bottom, because what's going to come with 12 years is now increased pensions, increased retirement, increased all these different things. And it's just going to be a way to...
And it kind of fosters private industry to get in bed with those people, and then there's other money out there to other interests. The other thing we have a problem with in Michigan, and I'm sure it's elsewhere, is like, you know, over in Flint, we had Dale Kildee, and then he hands the position to his son, Dan Kildee. And that, you look down in Detroit, there's 3 or 4 of those examples. You look up even in the UP, in the Upper Peninsula, there's examples of nepotism. With a family or with a particular business, you know, group, and they're the ones kind of handing the seat off and handing the baton off. And if you expand that to 12 years, you're never going to have a common Joe get
then
that.
It's a monarchy.
Get that position. And it's interesting. This is happening,
pass it down family to
under
family.
kind of a leftist administration in an election year where they need help. They're going to bring people to the polls, and this might not even be, you know, that attractive to people. But if they can win and slip it through, then you undermine the electoral system by just not putting that many people in it, and, you know, controlling that. So, I would say Prop 1, no. I'm going to vote no on that, just because, you know, just the 12 years altogether, I don't think anybody should have that. You know, I think Pastor Jason's right. You know, you're a citizen statesman. You go in and serve your term or 2, and then you move on, you know, and you let
get some
else
fresh
in.
blood in there, some fresh perspective. Someone that's been with the people, understands the groanings and the pains, and let them get in there and try to make
This
some
is not
difference.
going to stop political cabals. This is going to enhance political cabals.
Oh, for sure.
And government efficiency just means more efficient tyranny.
Right, exactly.
So it's all right that it gets muddled up.
Yeah.
It's good. It's actually good for us.
Right.
It's good that they're not that efficient, because all government is going to do is move towards more government.
And Michigan used to have longer terms, but then we changed those. And in fact, it was Democrats who changed them because they didn't like Republicans who'd been in office. That's really what happened. And so now they're trying to change it back now that they feel like they're leaning over the cabal. So yeah, no to that. So let's look at proposal number 2. Proposal number 2 has to do with lessening of voter ID demands and early voting enhancements. And I'll be honest with you, when I was young and like just getting into and I came up when Reagan was in. That was the first president where I was politically engaged, and they were talking about voter IDs then, but they were talking about a national voter ID. Okay, and conservatives were against that. Like, we're not centralized government, and we don't want everyone to have. You have a state ID. And that was a big fight, and basically it never went to a national voter ID. Well, now most states, you get your driver's license, a state ID, but it works on a national communication level. So we practically, if you get a Michigan driver's license or a Michigan state ID, you are in a national thing. So, in a way, over time, we've kind of lost that argument, and you are in some sort of national thing. But then you got certain states like California that says, well, if we get an illegal alien come across the border, we're going to give them a state ID or a driver's license, even though they're not a citizen. And so then technically they're on this national voters thing. And I guess, the other bureaus like of immigration aren't utilizing that tool to track people down, because they're not allowed to cross that line or whatever. But I think you should have a picture ID. I think you have to have a picture ID to cash a check.
Anything.
Anything.
To do anything.
Yeah, and so
to
voting.
Get on an airplane.
Well, picture ID, or let's do it the Afghanistan style and the blue thumb.
Sure.
You remember when they?
One vote.
One vote. You got
Right.
one. You got one right thumb. You put it in the ink. It stays there for a couple of days. Everyone knows you voted. That's the whole idea. This is another. As you think about that, and you brought up California, this is part of the importance also of the Electoral College, because voting should be governed by the states. So every state should have the majority say or the overwhelming say on how their citizens are going to vote. And if the beauty of the Electoral College is if one state goes rogue, the rest of the country is insulated by that
Right.
because they can't sway outside of their electoral
It's
college.
what makes us a republic.
Yeah.
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 It makes us a republic.
But that's coming to an end as well.
So, what's the deal if there is no voter ID and you just show up and vote and say I have a right to vote? I mean, that's kind of where they're trying to take it.
Yeah.
So that anybody can come. Well, that opens it up to voting multiple times, coming up with, and you're not the person that's voting. You're like representing their vote.
Or not a citizen of this country.
And not a citizen of this country.
This proposal is a wonderful reverse engineering of what happened last election.
Yeah.
So basically, hey, we found something that worked.
Yeah.
Now let's just legalize
Let's make
this.
it legal.
Let's just make it
Right.
legal.
The early voting enhancements as well. Like I'm for, like, if you're a serviceman overseas, if you have a work visa and you're working 6 months for your company, let's say you're IBM, but you're working over in France for 6 months or whatever. I mean, it'd be hard to come back to be on voting day. But if you had a work visa or whatever, and as long as there was 90 days ahead of time that you were pre-registering, and then you voted one day before the voting day, that's early registration and early voting.
Right.
Sometimes people are sick or elderly or whatever, and maybe they could do the same thing. But you can't make that perfect. You can't make that perfect for everybody. And so, the idea is one vote, one living person. How do you ensure that? One day.
Right.
One vote day. Maybe it should become a holiday, so everybody has the
everyone
same,
has a day off work
or whatever. One or everybody's making the same sacrifice.
Yeah.
One registration and polling place, one process, one ballot, one permanent marker. Everybody's got these different. Some are digital, some are hanging chads, some are whatever. One photo ID, state or federally issued. One encumbrance for everybody. Yeah. It's the same hassle for everybody. One exception. And that is 90-day pre-registration with sick elderly servicemen or temporary work people who have their papers for that.
Sure.
They get an absentee ballot. It has to be postmarked by a post office the day before the election in order to be controlled. But that seems reasonable to give a few changes and to give a little bit. But what Prop 2 is saying is these early voting enhancements. If you go on there and read that, it just really wants to be a free for all.
Yeah.
Well,
I think
and they're advertising young people. Hey, it's easy. Make sure that you
right.
vote early.
I think 99% of people that would hear that And that sounds reasonable, practical. It sounds, I want to live in a country that has some guidelines. But what they're being told is requiring voter ID is racist.
Right.
They've put this narrative out. So now you have people who would practically believe that, but they're told, well, voter ID, and you got people believing, well, if you're in a minority area, if you're an African American, you can't get voter ID. So that's a racist statement all by itself. Yet people believe that. So like, I'm against, let's get rid of the voter ID thing because it's a racist thing.
And the narrative is, that's what old people do. We're young people. We should be able to vote on our phone.
Yeah.
And all this kind of stuff. I mean, it kind of makes sense, but then everybody's out to get you is the narrative. And the early voting enhancements, just like the legislation, it's just going to give people an opportunity to complain about the fact that they didn't get their right to vote, or somebody was out to get their right to vote.
Yeah. Well, understanding that we live in a country where you have a right to vote, that's to be something that's held up higher than it is.
Yeah. But you're right. Doesn't mean you can sit on your butt on a couch at home. It means you can get out on voting day and go vote.
That's what I was trying to get at, is that understanding that this is a privilege that we have in this country that a lot of countries don't, and that I'm going to take this day, this important day, I'm going to do my research, know who I want representing me, who I want to be my voice in Lansing or in D.C. or whatever the case, so that I make an informed decision, because not doing that is an infringement on what my country might be someday. Right. It could change that. And people don't have that understanding. Right. People don't have that knowledge. And so people move heaven and earth to be available on Christmas Day.
Right.
Why not move heaven and earth to be available on this one day every 4 years that we're going to just vote and make sure that we keep our country a republic? Yeah,
and a lot of times the next generation, they have their phone, and their phone, they share an identity. Yeah. And so therefore, why can't, if I just vote, why can't they know that that's me? And why can't? Yeah. But well, then we don't know that's you. That could be somebody else that's stealing that vote, or you could be getting paid to vote. There's a whole lot of things they kind of don't think through. They're just thinking ease, because that's how life is today, and they think ease is a right.
Yeah,
ease is not a right.
With the exception of extenuating circumstances, like you mentioned, show up on the day with an ID and vote in person. Like that should be. That's common sense to me. Yeah, that's common sense.
So these first two make it easier to cheat, open the door to all kinds of cheating and complaining, and then even after the fact, complaining that election was rigged. Right? That's really what this is setting it up for, to create a crisis in voting, to where we have to now go to some new system that one guy in one room can be manipulating the numbers of the votes, and nothing else matters.
And it defangs our ability to question the results.
Right. Right.
So there always ought to be a recourse. There ought to be a filing of grievance.
That's I think where it's going. That's why I said these are confusing, because they're not just outright like what we're talking about. They are outright, but there's also some stuff built in here that's saying down the road we have room to complain. Down the road we have this. And
an absentee ballot.
These are pregnant with other intentions.
Absentee ballots lends itself to the temptation or the plot to do ballot harvesting. We saw in our 2020 election that multiple states, Trump was leading, 4 a.m., 3 a.m., the chart's going like this. All of a sudden there's this huge spike, 300,000 votes, all 100% for Joe Biden. Right. 100%. If you flipped a coin 300,000 times, you're not going to all land on heads. So that seems suspicious, that 300,000 absentee ballots came in and they're all for one person. Yeah. And so that certainly allowing that lends itself to a lack of checks and balances, lack of being able to make sure that there's integrity behind that. And so to me, again, the idea that let's show up in person with an ID, let's prove who we say we are, so that our elections are integral. And the thing is, to steal an election in America, people think, that could never happen. You don't have to do it in 50 states. Right. You have to do it in about 4 or 5 battleground states, and really just in like 4 or 5 counties in the whole country. If those 4 or 5 counties and those 4 or 5 battleground states can change the whole thing, so they can hone in where they would want to do this cheating.
And that's why I'm saying no voting machines, because you got 4 or 5 counties. There's some guy in this case, both for the Trump election and the Biden election, we're like, this is being tallied over in Germany. Yeah. You know what I mean? By the company that's got the software and stuff. And so that's why I say one person, one place, one vote, one exception rule. And that way everyone's got the same encumberment to go vote. It's a right, but it's a right that you people have lived and died for, so you can go sacrifice for that, or let's make it a national holiday so it's less of an encumbrance for everybody. And then let's try to accommodate the people where it's difficult for, But this Prop 2 is actually putting extra problems on like counties, because it's saying every county has to have a special needs, and by that I don't mean handicap, but every county has to provide a special needs process for those that have a complaint that day. I went and vote here, but now I got to go here. It's just making a way to stop the election and undermine it so that we can fix it by doing that. And it also says it doesn't have to be public money paying for that. Prop 2 says we can now get private money or charitable money in to provide for that. And so what about Black Lives Matter? What about, some of these?
Well, we're going to go back
issues?
to the New York days of Tweed, and we're going to be standing at the polls with sandwiches, handing them out to come vote for Tweed, or come, that's basically what that is.
Yeah.
That's the idea of, in Georgia, we had people lined up for hours to try to vote, and so they need water, they need food. Well, what's that going to turn into?
Right.
That's going to turn into, here's the buffet.
Right.
Come to the party and then come vote.
And some of those, like you said, 4 or 5 counties where it's like people are like, oh, I got to take off work, I got to go stand in line because they don't have their polling process.
Right.
I mean, that's almost engineered, and this is a way that we can extend the voting and all that kind of stuff.
But what is that issue? Okay, should people in this day and age have to stand in line for 3 hours to vote? No, I think they should do it to vote. But no, we could probably be better at that.
Yeah.
But who's responsible for that? That local board of canvassers.
Yes.
That local Secretary of State, or the local fire that person.
Bureau of
So
Elections.
whoever is out there standing in line for 3 hours, your grievance is with the person who's in charge of your local elections.
Yeah.
Fire that person.
Right.
For incompetence.
Yeah.
That's your problem.
For the amount of money that they're spending on these voting machines and the software and the contracts with the companies, et cetera, you could just enhance polling places and make it. There's 4 lines. There's 20 people working, not 3.
Right.
And I walk into gym and there's four polling places. So there's this line, and there's 3 little old ladies, bless their heart, and you're standing in that line, and you get your ballot and you go, and then there's only 4 stanchions to go, and everybody's kind of standing for that. So forget that voting machine. We could fix this problem and make it a faster process.
Well, and again, understanding you live in a country where you have the privilege to vote, you'll stand in line for a roller coaster for 3 hours. If you got to stand in line to vote for who's going to run your country or be your representative, stand in line. Like, it's a privilege.
Yeah.
But people don't see it that way.
Well, and not only is
That's
it a
good.
privilege,
That's good.
and we're not. It's not a popularity contest, as you and I were talking before off camera. Voting is the exercise of authority. So you've been delegated a portion of authority because we are a government for the people, by the people.
Yes.
And so we don't have a king.
Yes. Right.
We have a vote.
Right.
Okay. And so now that the king, all the consolidated power in one person, has now been delegated to 50 million people, or 250 million people, however many people are going to vote.
Half of which vote.
Right. And you have a percentage of that.
Right.
That's what your vote represents.
Exercise your kingship on this day.
Right. You're exercising your authority.
this way.
Therefore, then, as you mentioned earlier, I've surrendered my rights to Christ. As a Bible believer, your vote is an exercise of authority by which the scriptures mandate that you exercise righteous authority.
Right.
So you need to vote right. You need to vote the right way. And so it's not what it's not even your preference. It's what does God say is right.
And like I said about the Bureau of Elections, is if this is a constitutional amendment with financial disclosures get changed, the Bureau of Elections is going to have little really power over that. And then if we have all these mandatory early voting enhancements, the lessening of voter IDs, Bureau of Elections they're not going to be able to handle that. And that's what this is. Let's inundate the system. It's like the Muslim with 4 wives comes over here. One of them's his wife because it's illegal to have bigamy, but the other 3 are on the public dole over here. And so you're inundating the system. You know what I mean? Yeah. And that's this is inundating the election system and breaking it.
For as big as government is already, it's not even big enough to handle the paper bureaucracy that we created. Yeah. So all the laws we've created, the government right now is not big enough. I'll give you an example. I was talking to a pharmacist yesterday, and he was eligible. He went through all the certification to do instant COVID tests in his pharmacy. Okay, it's a service he could provide, right? He doesn't do them because the law requires that he reports all results. And the government never set up the office to report the results.
Right.
So the law requires him to do something that is impossible to do.
Right.
The office does not exist anymore.
Right.
So he goes, what am I supposed to do?
Right.
So his counsel was, they said, don't do it because you're going to be found illegal, even though the government has created a law that's impossible to follow.
Right.
That's government at its finest.
And that's government at its finest. So Prop 2, again, I think we're universal in saying I'm going to vote no Prop 1, Prop 2.